welcome to the VSC Healing Begins Here podcast series. The Victim Service Center, or the VSC, is a nonprofit organization that provides free, individualized counseling and other services to survivors of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. In this episode, we will be talking about the impact of trauma on the brain. According to the National Council for Mental Well-Being, 70% of adults in the United States have experienced some type of traumatic event at least once in their lives. That's 223.4 million people. So the goal for today is to provide more information on how the brain is affected by these experiences. We are joined by Dr. Brenda Arroyo to learn more about healing and the brain after trauma. Welcome and thank you so much for being here today.
Hello, Hannah. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Yes.
Can you start off by sharing with us a little bit more about who you are and the work that you do?
Yes, of course. So a quick bio. I graduated from Alviso University in Puerto Rico. I finished my doctoral degree, and over there I worked for 3 years or more with victims of sexual abuse. And after I finished and graduate, I completed my residency in Hartford, Connecticut. There was a trauma center, and I was trained with the TFCBD model, which is one of the models that work with trauma and children that have been victims of trauma. So I work with sexual abuse, physical abuse, other type of trauma. And after I finished, I moved to Florida, and I'm right here. And in the middle of the pandemic in 2020, I decided to open my clinic. So I have been doing psychological testing, including, the trauma component on those evaluations for autism, ADHD, learning disorders, and of course, providing treatment. My beautiful staff also work with trauma symptoms.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for your service.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. I'm so happy.
So since we're going to be speaking about trauma as it relates to the brain, can you talk about what trauma is?
So trauma is a significant experience, events that we face in daily living life. So you may face yourself having a grief, someone who you may love, a friend or a family member. It could be also sexual abuse, physical abuse, even witnesses domestic violence. So that kind of events are considered traumatic experiences. And the way it impacts the brain is because we perceive the world according to our experiences. So when you face a challenge in life or a traumatic event, immediately, your brain became, through the sense, receiving information. So we try to survive the trauma. So it impacts the way you see, you believe, your thoughts, your feelings, and even your actions.
So when speaking about trauma, I hear a lot about coping skills. So what are coping skills and why are they so important when we talk about trauma?
Well, Hannah, one of the things that you may think is how you react when you are experiencing a significant event or how you face a challenge in life. That's a behavior or emotional response that you have. That's coping strategies. Traumatic experiences impact people resources. So there is a relationship between positive coping strategies and psychological well-being. So it's very important having strategies, good strategies to overcome the trauma and having a normal life.
How can someone who has experienced trauma identify what their current coping mechanisms are?
So again, if you think, how are you facing, how your brain and your body is reacting to that challenge? Let's suppose you are simple things like in traffic. How you react to that? How are you calling someone and say, hey, I'm here, I'm so late, and begin, venting? Or you get mad? So sometimes we don't know. Everybody in life may overcome trauma, not in a good way. We may isolate from our family members. We may fight with them, or we may do gambling, or spending too much on shopping, or simple things that it may affect your daily living functioning.
What are some, based on your experience, what would you say are some healthy and effective coping mechanisms that people can do after they've experienced a trauma?
Things like talking to a friend, connecting with your spirituality, just going for a walk, doing exercise, simple things like that usually are good habits, healthy ways to do it. That's why evidence-based treatments such as CBT, EMDR, cognitive processing therapy, for example, they teach you how to modulate your emotions, how to behave in a good way, how to relax yourself after experiencing something difficult. So all of those models and other ones shows evidence. If you look at the research, they shows that practicing positive strategies will help you to at least calm down, relax yourself, and then go to the next step to face, of course, the trauma that you are living.
How can someone use mindfulness and self-care practices to de-escalate like their feelings of anxiety, or if they're like in a state of anger or irritation? Because like you mentioned, how someone reacts is a coping mechanism. So if someone is in traffic, like them getting visibly like agitated and angry and screaming at like the person in front of them, that's a coping mechanism. So how can someone use a mindfulness practice to ground themselves and like stay calm in that situation?
We get disconnected. Sometimes if you are in a test, you may begin thinking, well, what if I get a bad grade? Or what if I'm not enough to get a good grade or pass or fail? So that kind of situations, that kind of thoughts disconnect us from the present. You totally forgot that you need to answer a question and time is running. So you should be aware of the present, and that's how mindfulness works, using your five senses. Again, your brain overreact or may feel that you are in danger when you are not. So the best way to do it is teaching your brain, teaching yourself how to be present. What do you smell? What do you see? What do you hear? Things like that, it helps you. It's a way of mindfulness. And again, the models that I was telling you about the trauma usually include mindfulness techniques to help you to calm down and be present.
I know you answered this quite a few times, but I want to know if you have anything else to say. So how can someone manage their negative coping mechanism, like reactions? So on top of practicing that grounding technique, identifying the five senses, and even like, slowing down and regulating their breath, is there anything else that you can think of that'll help someone combat or like de-escalate their negative reactions to things?
Using mindfulness or being aware, counting and all of that, but especially understanding that experiencing emotions is not totally normal. So we should know that sometimes there is shame, sometimes there is guilty. So talking to someone, recognizing that bad habits are learned, every behavior is learned, but also you can learn good behavior. So recognizing that there is hope at the end is one of the important steps.
What are some challenges that you would say that you have when you talk to your clients, or that you see that they have when it comes to grounding themselves and changing or redirecting their coping mechanisms from negative to positive?
Having difficulties regulating their emotions, having too much negative thoughts, and having other trauma experiences. So for example, you have a child have been victim of sexual abuse, and then they are removed from home. There is another challenge in their life. There is a grief. It's not at home with other family members. So that kind of change in the environment, there is no safety issues or safety environment are usually another challenge. So recognizing again, talking to them, providing psychoeducation about how to identify those are very important as well.
What is one piece of advice that you would give to someone who is going through a difficult time and they also recognize that they have negative coping mechanisms? So for example, they notice that after they get stressed out, they go home and they start drinking a lot. Or after they experience something, they're going home and they're arguing with their family members, arguing with their loved ones. What is one piece of advice that you can tell them that'll help them recognize that and also try to make change so that they have positive coping mechanisms?
So it's totally normal. When you feel bad, you want that bad sensation to go away. And usually people with alcohol, they may help in a way, going away for a brief moment. So it's acceptable that they feel that's the best way to deal with the trauma symptoms, with the emotions. But it has some risk, right? Alcohol and drugs are not good. So one thing is recognizing, again, acceptance that that is something that is happening. There's hope, but you should talk to someone, and mental health professionals are here for help. So having, especially if you have been experiencing traumatic event, you should look for a mental health provider who has experience with trauma, not just with abuse and sustained abuse, but with trauma, and having an integration of both of them.
Dr. Arroyo, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for answering those questions. You were amazing.
Thank you.
In our next segment, we will be joined by Shaye Stall, who is one of VSC's amazing crisis counselors. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the VSC Healing Begins Here podcast series. In this final segment, we are joined by the amazing Shaye Stall. Welcome, Shaye. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Hannah.
Of course. Can you start off by sharing a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, so I'm a victim advocate and crisis counselor at Victim Service Center. I mostly work with clients of trauma because we work with all clients of trauma. I work with coping skills, and that way those clients are able to have those coping skills when they go to therapy. I can also accompany them to their forensic collections, and I can be an advocate in regards to calling law enforcement or any other medical professional or mental health professional for the client if they so choose.
Can you share more about the VSC and the services that they provide?
Oh man, we have a lot of services that we provide. Well, we provide education and prevention, and then we also provide accompaniment to forensic collections, like I said. We have a 24/7 helpline, which is answered by our advocates. We do crisis counseling, and we also do therapy as well.
Who are the services available to?
They're available to anybody that is a victim of trauma, anybody that is a Spanish speaker or the LGBTQ plus community, literally anyone at any time. People can come across trauma. We serve counties of Orange, Osceola, and Seminole. So if the victimization happened in any of those counties, but they live somewhere else in Florida, we can serve them. Or if the victimization happened outside of those counties, we can also serve them if they live in the counties as well.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Is there an age limit to who you can serve, or is it like anyone can just come in?
So we serve people 12 and up,
Okay.
And anybody that has been victimized of any sort of violent crime.
Does anybody need to report the trauma or the violence that happened to them in order to receive these services?
No, that's a great question. They do not have to report to law enforcement if they so choose. Even if they want a forensic collection, they won't get results, but they will be able to get the collection as well. And then going from there, anybody can come in.
Based on your experience as a victim advocate and based on the clients that you help and you serve, what are some of the victimization types that you see and how do they vary?
Oh, wow. I see a lot. So we mostly focus on sexual assault, but we also see survivors of homicide. We see survivors of suicide and so on and so forth. They vary all the time.
Why would you say these services are so important for our community to know about? And in general, why are they important?
They're important because trauma is just everywhere.
Yeah.
People such as like Hurricane Ian, those victims, they can come in and receive our services, or at least get referrals out. We know a lot about trauma because all of our advocates are trauma informed, so we kind of know what to deal with, what we're kind of expecting. It's just nice to have that resource out there because there's trauma everywhere.
I actually did some research a couple days ago, and I saw that annually Orlando averages 14,000 crimes like a year. And I always, like when I give trainings as well, I always say that that affects 28,000 people, and people are like, wait, how did you get that number? And it's because trauma doesn't only directly affect that person who was involved in that violent crime or whatever it was, but it also affects like their loved ones, their friends, their community, society, and ultimately like it can affect the entire United States culture. For example, like the earthquakes in Syria and Turkey right now. We're hearing about it all the way from the United States. So based on the clients that you serve, do you also serve people who are family members or friends of that victim?
Oh yeah, for sure. Secondary victims is what we call them. We want to start a support group, hopefully coming soon. Secondary victims are also very prevalent. A lot of people bring, a loved one to their forensic collection, and then we will get in touch with both the primary victim and the secondary, because the trauma when it comes to secondary victims is going to look a lot different than the primary. They need support too, so it's just very important that we support all victims regarding that.
How is the VSC accessible to everyone?
So we are Spanish speaking. We have a Spanish speaking advocate, and then we also have LGBTQ plus advocates. We serve, like I said, 12 and up. So anybody at any time, whenever they're ready, we meet the client where they're at, can come in and receive our services.
As a victim advocate, I know you've been here as long as I have.
Yeah, we're new.
Yeah. What has been the most rewarding part of your job so far?
The most rewarding part is definitely being somebody that I think that person needs in that moment. Being that support, being that person that they can just reach to, talk to. I was gonna say I also like to bother my supervisors a lot, so that's also a really fun thing to do with Victim Service Center. But yeah, that's probably the biggest impact that we probably have.
What's one piece of advice that you would give to someone who's just endured something very traumatic, or they're trying to leave an abusive relationship? And also, what's a piece of advice you'd give to a secondary survivor, someone who's trying to support that person through that process?
Yeah, the domestic violence one is kind of a hard one because they, statistically, they'll go back 7 times. But whenever they're ready, we're going to be here. Call our helpline. We'll be able to give you resources. We'll be able to do a coping skill with you, whatever you need. Advice-wise, we're going to meet you where you are at, and that's totally fine. If you're not ready, that's okay. We understand. As far as secondary victims, we'll meet you where you're at again. There's really just no way around it. I don't think I can give a solid piece of advice because everybody stems so differently when it comes to trauma.
Right.
So we're just here whenever you need us. That's the biggest support I can give.
Can you explain a little bit more about the process of when someone calls our helpline and what exactly can they expect, especially through their healing journey?
Yeah, so our helpline is going to be answered by any of the advocates. We all have our masters in the social health department. We will, ask maybe kind of what's going on, if they're having trouble coping or doing something to regulate themselves. Then we'll do a coping skill. That varies with whoever answers the helpline because we do change, which is great. If they're calling for a forensic collection, we will ask maybe, it is confidential, I will say that, but we will probably ask, their name, date of birth, and so on, just so that way we have that information going in. Something else, I guess, is just we do have support always. When we do meet for the forensic collection, you don't have to report to law enforcement, but that's basically kind of what they can expect is just support, whether they just need to get something off their chest or whether they're needing a coping skill or if they want to meet and get the collection done.
Shaye, thank you so much. I do want to say that I admire the work that you do. I appreciate you so much. You're really helping the community. So thank you for your service and thank you for showing up every day.
Thank you, Hannah.
If you would like to learn more about the VSC and our free services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. Call our office line at 407-254-9415 or call our crisis line at 407-500-HEAL. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone.